It is very important as you kind of formulate your cloud migration journey that you answer two very simple questions. The first question obviously is why? Why are you looking to migrate to the cloud? And typically it could be for any number of reasons. Some may be motivated by the fact that the cost model is very different when you look at on-prem versus cloud. Certain others may be interested in the elastic nature of cloud. Certain others might also be looking to use the cloud because they're expanding into markets, different from where they were set up physically. All of these motivations and others may be why you're looking to migrate to the cloud. But again, it is very important to understand that there are many different teams involved in any sort of an endeavor. And quite possibly most of these teams are going to be impacted by this decision. So take the time to go and talk to those teams, understand what are their challenges in the current environment and what they hope to address by migrating to the cloud. Now, by doing this and collating all of this information, you have a more cohesive business argument that addresses many different angles. And therefore, when you present it to the management team, it seems more complete in that sense. So now that you have a good why, you now have to understand the how. How are you going to realize that outcome of migrating to the cloud?
So a lot of people, when they are first visiting cloud migration, the logical first question is where to start. So the first two pieces, which really play off of each other and starting on coming up with a plan for migration, are the education piece and the migration plan itself. So obviously, in order to come up with that migration plan, you have to back that with an education for yourself. So first of all, you need to know about what platforms currently exist as your options for migrating. These typically come into three categories, which I'm sure at this point most of us has heard of: IaaS, PaaS, and SaaS. So that's infrastructure as a service, platforms as a service, and software as a service. Infrastructure as a service is going to be giving you the most low-level access and control over your actual resources and infrastructure. So this is going to be something like Amazon's EC2, where you can manually configure all of the resources yourself, or Amazon's S3, that's a storage service. Again, it is managed in the sense that it's on Amazon servers, but you get control as to who has access, where those buckets are, etc. For platforms as a service, this is going to be a little bit less low level. So if managing all of that infrastructure and resources is not for you, if that seems like more machinery really than your company needs to handle, that's totally fine. And this is a great option. So these platforms as a service that are most common are AWS Elastic Beanstalk or Heroku, where you can upload an application and then behind the scenes, that platform will automatically configure your infrastructure for you. And then finally, software as a service is going to be a managed software service, just as you would expect. So this is something like Splunk, a third-party service that offers managed logging for you and your applications. So understanding the platforms that exist, the difference between IaaS, PaaS, and SaaS is super crucial to coming up with this migration plan. You need to know what your needs are and what makes the most sense for your team. So that also includes educating yourself on the team dynamic and what processes currently exist within the software development lifecycle process, if any. This is a great opportunity to find where the roadblocks are and some of the issues that are not working as well as they could be for your team. So understanding exactly how the software and applications that you currently run are being managed is super crucial piece of the education portion, because just because something is a best practice or a super ideal solution doesn't mean that it's going to be a great solution for your business, depending on how it runs and what the team dynamics look like. So that's the first piece, is educating yourself on what exists out there and what strategies are going to work best for this kind of team, for this kind of workload specifically.
There are many areas that you need to address when you think about how. First and foremost, what does your roadmap look like? And set up some realistic timelines. What do you plan to achieve by when? And a lot of this, when you look at a roadmap, you're thinking of so many different factors. One is, how are you going to enable this environment in the cloud? Think automation all along. And therefore, you've got to understand, if you've used certain automation stacks for your infrastructure, for your on-premise infrastructure, that is, it may or may not work in the cloud environment. So you've got to understand how you're going to address any sort of skills or knowledge gaps, if there were any in that space. Now you have a roadmap, you have some timelines, you have to incorporate certain committed business guidelines. So for example, there may be security and compliance related challenges. How are you going to incorporate that? When are those teams going to be included into your process? Typically, to include them right at the start is always a good idea, because if they have gaps in terms of experience or knowledge, it's always good for them to be involved right up front, so they can understand what is the ask and therefore find a way to address it. So you now have a roadmap, you've involved the appropriate teams. You also, through these conversations, have possibly understood what some of the knowledge and experience gaps might be it amongst the development teams, the test teams, the infrastructure teams, the production teams, and so on. So try to find a way to address that. Sometimes it may be organically by organizing your training sessions. There may be certifications that the team members can take, but also try to augment that with some external help. That is usually a good way to kind of jumpstart this whole journey. Remember that no matter what all of this looks like, depending on the organization and the structure of your organization, you are going to succeed only when you secure the necessary buy-in. And that buy-in is not just from your manager or your management team, but it may be also their peer managers. So be ready for that journey as well.
And once you have a better understanding of that, you can start creating your migration plan. So in the migration plan, you want to keep in mind really everything that you're going to have to end up implementing. Ultimately, nothing should be an afterthought. So this should be as detailed as you can possibly make it. So you're going to include a security analysis of anything that really needs to be locked down in your infrastructure. How are you going to lock that down? How are you going to make sure that your data and your workloads are protected from the public? And then next, you're going to look at the management planning itself. So who's going to be the owner of these services? Who's going to make a change if something fails? How are you going to make these changes if your application fails? You need to consider really all of the possible scenarios that can happen once you do migrate and figure out how you're going to address those. And that's the best way to avoid getting stuck when you're migrating, is to go in with a really firm plan. Another piece of the migration plan is a risk assessment, which kind of falls into what I just said. So with risk assessments, you are going to want to think of all of the possible pitfalls, everything that could possibly go wrong with your migration and how you're going to address it. That way you already have a plan. And finally, you want to think about your budget, and you want to think about your rollout. So budget is pretty self-explanatory. This is just probably going to be a number that you're going to get from either someone higher than you, or maybe it's a number that you know because you are the person in charge of finances, which will be great in helping you figure out exactly what strategies you can use, what's going to be overkill in terms of services, but also what's going to be the bare necessities. So kind of balancing what you need with what's possible within the budget. And then lastly, once the last part of your migration plan is when everything goes well, you're going to ultimately have to roll out the new cloud migration. So if your application is something that's super business critical and is used every day, you need to think about how is the best way that you can roll that out. I like to suggest blue-green deployments, which basically means that you'll have your old applications still in use, and slowly over time, as you become more confident that your new application migration is working just as you expected, you can roll over traffic until eventually all of the traffic goes directly to your new application. It is possible to do all at once deployments for less business critical features, but there are different options depending on what your workload is, how often it's being used, etc. But that is the last and arguably most important piece of the migration plan. Once your application is up and running, how are you actually going to get it into commission? So those are the things that you need to be thinking about when you are educating yourself and coming up with a plan on how to migrate.